Just talking musicals, musicals with you. Hello, I'm Lesley Anne Knight and welcome to the Just Talking Musicals meetup, where I get to have a quick catch up with some of today's outstanding theatre professionals from the West End and Broadway. On the other side of the Zoom window today is an actor whose notable credits span the West End, Broadway, television and film. Today's guest has not only played Grantaire and Javert in Les Miserables in the West End, but also played the Army General of the National Guard in Tom Hooper's multi-million-dollar film version of the musical in 2012. He has played Raoul in Phantom of the Opera at the Royal Albert Hall, Stein in the acclaimed Donmar Warehouse production of City of Angels directed by Josie Rourke, and played none other than Frederick Frankenstein in the UK premiere of Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein at the Garrick Theatre in 2017. As you may have gathered, this particular CV is packed full of interesting roles and shows, too numerous to mention here, although I can't resist throwing in a few more for good measure, like the Fantastics at the Duchess Theatre, the Pirate Queen in Chicago and Broadway, the Pajama Game at Chichester, and a much anticipated return to City of Angels in 2020, this time on Shaftesbury Avenue back at the Garrick Theatre. Oh yes, and he's also written a musical too. Therefore gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome Hadley Fraser to the meetup today. Hadley, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Lesley.
Oh, it's so lovely to meet you today.
Thanks. It's rather nice to sort of be forced to re-engage with your CV. I don't know. I'm not one to sort of dwell on it too much, but I suppose because we've been lacking theatre so much and lacking being in one, it's rather nice to have sort of had a little bit of a sort of quick whiz round some of those shows and some of those venues. Thank you for that.
Oh no, my pleasure. And what a wonderful thing. I'm sort of looking at your career to date. You often see, and what I love is that sort of reading about you, you've done a lot of stuff with Josie Rourke, haven't you?
That's correct. Yeah. We first worked together, I suppose it must have been 2013. We did a play together about chess, which was much more exciting than that might sound. All about when Garry Kasparov played Deep Blue, the machine, and lost. And Gary's never quite got over it. And we did it at the Manchester International Festival and then over on in New York at this amazing venue called the Park Avenue Armory. So we started working then, and then we did Coriolanus together with Tom Hiddleston pretty much straight after that, I think. And then I think we've probably worked together, I don't know, 6 or 7 times maybe, you know, in various different capacities and for various different lengths of time. So yeah, Josie and I have got, I suppose, a similar aesthetic about things and a similar way of working, and have built up, as actors and directors do sometimes, something of a shorthand or a sort of ESP understanding of one another. So I might have jinxed it now. We might never work together again, especially now she's off working, you know, shooting massive Hollywood films and stuff like that. That'll be it. But I've a lot to thank Josie for. She's, I suppose, from time to time we get champions, don't we, in our lives, and she's certainly been one of mine.
And it must be a lovely feeling. You must feel so comfortable working with a director that you know and trust and that you know how they think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's a very fortunate position to be in, I suppose. I count myself very fortunate to have worked that many times and for her to have asked me back that many times. Yeah, like I say, we have this kind of understanding, I suppose. And she'll sort of, I suppose these days, not necessarily need to actually give me direction from time to time. It'll just be a look or a sort of point or a sort of hand gesture or something like that. And I think I'll normally know what she's talking about. And I suppose also the sort of trust extends both ways. You know, she'll often, I suppose, ask for my advice, which I don't suppose as actors we're often asked for, and that's probably wise. But, you know, we wrote a show together as well, so I suppose that trust does extend relatively far.
Yeah, I suppose we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here, but wasn't that called Committee?
Yes, it was. The full title was the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee Takes Oral Evidence on Whitehall's Relationship with Kids Company, which, as you can imagine, we chose the title exclusively for the T-shirts and the mugs, because that would have gone particularly well. Yes, it was something that I suppose Josie had been hankering for a while, to write a brand new piece of musical theatre, music theatre, whatever you want to call it, for the Donmar. And myself and my collaborator Tom Deering, who was the composer on that project, had been working on a few different projects, none of which had really quite seen the light of day. And then myself, Tom and Josie all got drunk one evening at the press night of The Winter's Tale that I was doing for Ken Branagh's company. That sounds like a massive name drop. So yeah, it just so happened. And the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee select committee hearing into the collapse of Kids Company had just happened, and had been something of a sort of nerd's joy. The way that it had sort of transcended some of the normally quotidian select committee hearings, and it becomes something of a sort of, we felt it had this sort of operatic quality to it, I suppose, to the drama. And the three of us sort of went into battle in terms of taking this select committee hearing, the transcript of it, and turning it into a show. So from slightly inauspicious starts and unexpected origins, we came up with this beast. And I think it's fair to say sort of split the crowd. Some people weren't too keen on it, and that's fair enough. We were very proud of it in the end, and we assembled a fantastic cast and creative team. And it's something that I think Tom and I and Josie can look back on with a great deal of pride, I think.
And the Donmar is a wonderful place to put it on at, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I've been very fortunate to work there a number of times, and it began to feel like something, I suppose, of a home in the West End for a while. There's few other places, I think, that give you that sense of proximity to the audience, but also allow you a sense of the epic as well. City of Angels, I suppose we had that. You know, that's a huge undertaking to try that show. Coriolanus too, which can be staged as something of an epic, you know, investigation of politics and democracy. I suppose in the Donmar it had that, but it also turned into something of a family drama as well, or a sort of interpersonal drama and interpersonal drama for Tom playing Coriolanus as well. So yeah, it's a unique space really, and you know, it's one, thinking about it now, you know, I'd sort of do anything to be back there, even sat in the audience, just to be back in the theatre, back in the Donmar would be a thrill.
And the other, I completely understand that. And the other thing that I was going to say to you about being the writer, because you wrote the book, and did you write the lyric? You suppose you worked on the lyrics from the transcript, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah, we took the publicly available transcript of the committee hearing, and Josie and I sort of whittled it down, I suppose, to some manageable sections that we thought were particularly more dramatic. And then I suppose I went away and sort of turned some of those sections into lyrics, into you know, what you might call sort of ensemble numbers or an aria for one or two of the others. And then as time went on, we sort of thought we might need something else. So there was written evidence that was submitted for the hearing as well. And those written pieces of evidence also became part of the show. So, you know, there's a tradition of verbatim theatre, isn't there? Things like London Road and The Permanent Way at the National. And so I don't suppose we were reinventing the wheel too much, but certainly for me, for a first go at writing something, I felt the ghosts of those writers who'd come before in the Donmar, and my own inexperience very keenly. But it's something I'll look to redo, I think, and lockdown has provided me with some time to do so. So, you know, I've been writing, and perhaps when the theatres, whenever they reopen, you know, hopefully they do, then I'll be ready to go with something, I hope.
How exciting. One thing I wanted to ask you about, hearing your words being performed on stage, and how do you compare that feeling with the feeling of performing yourself? So watching other people bring your work to life as opposed to bringing somebody else's work to life. What's that? Is that just as exciting?
Yeah, I suppose I would add that because it was the first time I did it, I wonder whether, I mean, everyone's different, obviously, but I wonder the more experienced you get at hearing people say your words, the more used to it you become. Certainly for that first time, the first press night, so the press night for committee, was particularly terrifying. We had such a fantastic cast that I knew we were in good hands, and a fantastic orchestra. so it was particularly nerve-wracking, and I was sat next to Nick Heitner as well. I don't know who at the Donmar sat me next to Nick Heitner, but that was particularly sweat-inducing. And I suppose I knew every single word, whereas if you're an actor, you'll know your scenes and obviously your part most of the time, but you're not necessarily going to know, unless you're one of those crazy people who knows every single word. You know, Judi Dench can probably make her way through most of Shakespeare, I imagine, and can quote it at you. But I wouldn't be able to tell you every single, actually I might be able to tell you every single word of City of Angels. That's a lie. There's not many shows that I know every single word to, but Committee was one of them. So I suppose I take myself back to the first time I was an actor on professional stage, and that was as nerve-wracking. So the two are comparable, but I suppose experience teaches you that you get less nervous and it becomes a sort of normal thing, doesn't it, you know?
Yeah. And I suppose we should get to our meetup questions, because we've got launched straight into just having a general conversation, which is utterly fascinating. But that actually is all related, working with Josie Rourke, because when the lockdown happened, and now our conversation today is the beginning of 2021, and we're in yet again lockdown. And but when it all happened last March, you just opened at the Garrick, hadn't you, a City of Angels? I asked people what it was like, because there were so many shows in the West End that were just opening around that time last year, weren't there?
Yeah, that's right. It was, well, I suppose, you know, the spring is often a time when people will, when new shows will come in, normally the spring and the autumn, I suppose, that people tend to target those times. So yeah, there was a lot going on, a lot opening. I don't know what your other guests have said, but for us, we were a week away from press night. So we'd done about 2 weeks of previews. And it was a show that was very dear to us, a production that was very dear to many of us who had done it before at the Donmar. And we had been joined by some fantastic new collaborators as well. I think Josie, it would be fair to say, had improved upon an already fantastic production. And that was matched by the rest of the creative team. Rob Jones, our designer, had done an incredible job in the Garrick, and Gareth Valentine, our musical director, Stephen Mear, our choreographer, had produced something that was really rather special. Unlike quite a lot of stuff, I suppose, that's on in the West End, City of Angels is a different proposition, both musically, thematically, I suppose, and you know, we were really looking forward to showing it to as many people as possible. It was a very, very classy piece of work. And then I suppose, you know, everything changed. And I'm someone who's resistant to false emotion, I think, Lesley. So I wouldn't say that, you know, it was something that I felt blindsided by, because I think we had sort of expected it, certainly within the preceding week or so. But there was a sense after the Donmar production that we were going to transfer, and that sort of felt like unfinished business that we didn't get to transfer it then.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we were a week away from press night and we had a 6-month run ahead of us, and we never got to do that, you know, there were far more important things. Obviously, this is a truism to say and slightly facile. There are far more important things than musical theatre happening in the world. But there is a sort of continuing sense for us, I think, who are involved in City of Angels, that there's still unfinished business.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether we will ever get to sort of put a full stop on it. I'm not sure, who knows?
I was so looking forward to seeing it. And because when it originally opened at the Donmar, it sold out in 47 minutes, didn't it? All its run.
Yeah,
and there were so many people that wanted to see it at the Garrick, because it's much bigger space, so much more you could do with it.
That's right. I mean, the Donmar, because it's a 3-sided space, you know, and there's sort of no fly space. There's only one bit of wing space. You're limited slightly, and it sort of forces a creativity which someone like Josie uses and makes a virtue of. But certainly at the Garrick, you know, we had some slightly more conventional theatre tricks up our sleeve. The projection work was, I think, really quite special in the Garrick. Josie had sort of thrown herself into and had a great deal of success in the world of film, which is sort of thematically part of City of Angels. So she understood that, I think, by her own admission, a great deal more going into the Garrick. And so that idea of mining the sort of film noir world and what movie making does for that particular show. I think Josie would have said that was something that she felt she improved upon. So yeah, it was a real shame, and you don't get to hear that score or scores like that all that frequently.
No,
it's often accused of being a little bit too clever for its own good, but I think it's a score that, and a show and a script that does not dumb down and asks an awful lot of its audience, but I think rewards the audience an awful lot as well, and doesn't take the audience for fools either. So yeah, it's a shame, but like I said, there are bigger things at play, I suppose, and very quickly, I think a certain sense of perspective was gained by all of us who had to sort of who had to leave the West End, so it's difficult, but it's what everybody is facing in the world.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I still, in a musical theatre sense though, and in our conversation today, just think, oh God, I really hope it goes back on. And I know that the end of last year, am I right in thinking that, producers were saying, no, we're doing our best to bring our shows back. It's just a matter of knowing when, isn't it?
I think so. It's a matter of knowing when. It's a matter of knowing when they can do it, safely for everybody involved in front of stage and backstage.
Yeah.
And safely economically as well, I suppose. I think if the end of last year taught the industry one thing, it's that if you come back too soon, it can sting you quite badly. So I don't think that's a particular secret, that I think an awful lot of theatres opened up and then had to close down again, especially before Christmas, when they were very, very keen to make awful lot of money that helps them survive. So yeah, it's a question of when. I suppose it's also a question of availability of people as well, people's inclination to get back. And, there is bare economics as well. Something like City of Angels is not a cheap show to put on. And I imagine that there may be, I'm not saying City of Angels absolutely, but there will be shows such as City of Angels that struggle because putting on a show in the West End or on Broadway is incredibly expensive, and it may be that people don't want to take that risk straight away. It may be 2 or 3 years before people decide that they feel like they can take those risks again. I think we're going to be looking at very small scale shows, safe financially for a while. That's not to say that we won't have some of those bigger shows up and running again. Obviously Cameron Mackintosh and Andrew Lloyd Webber, I think, needs an awful lot of credit for saying that he needs to, he will open his shows very quickly and wants to reopen. Nika Burns too, I think, has been at the forefront of that, a voice for the industry saying, look, let's open as soon as we can. But all of these things are going to be measured slightly and tempered slightly by circumstance and safety and finance.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned just earlier on that over the past 10 months that you've been working on a creative project, and that's one of the other things I'm fascinated on is interesting projects that you've been working on during lockdown. Some people just seem to bake. I certainly haven't been baking, and I watched. I was absolutely delighted to see you and Rosalie. Who I'm delighted to see on your name tag here this morning, that you in Before After at the Southwark. I watched that in September. I absolutely loved it. So that's one project I know that you were up to last year. But
I'm so glad you saw that.
Oh, I loved it. I sat in front of my computer, a glass of wine, as if I was at the theatre for the evening, and it was the first streamed show I'd watched.
Oh, right.
And I'd so missed being in the audience and enjoying theatre like everybody else all year. And you have that feeling of trepidation, thinking, is this just going to be like watching a recorded theatre piece that feels sometimes a bit dry and you feel removed? But the way that it was done with the sounds of the theatre around you, it felt like, for me, maybe I wouldn't say I'm that easily pleased. I just felt like I was taking part in a theatrical experience, and that's the truth. And I loved it. And everything about that production, all the aspects of it. You two were absolutely perfect and brilliant together. I loved it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Lesley. Yeah, it was. It was lovely. I think it came along for all of us involved at the right time as well, just at that moment where you felt like you know, your creativity was being stymied. And
Yeah.
there's a few people that deserve an awful lot of credit for that. Rosie and I, right at the bottom of the list, really, because we just sort of picked up the phone and said, yes, there's a young theatre company by the name of The Grey Area, run by producer-director Matthew Rankum and producer Laura Lutit. And they are probably 22, 23, something like that, not long having graduated Guildford School of Acting. And I think at the beginning of the year, I can't remember whether it was pre-lockdown or post-lockdown, they said, shall we set up a theatre company and shall we try and do something? So this all happened in the space of the year. They set up this company. They looked for a small scale production that I think they felt that they could stream successfully, found before after, because we had recorded a studio recording, cast recording, maybe 4 or 5 years earlier, I can't remember. And they took a bit of a punt, I think, and phoned up Rosie's agent and my agent and said, would you like to do it? And we sort of ummed and ahed about it and then just went, you know what, let's just do it. I mean, what have we got to lose to a certain extent? And I liked the piece very much. I think Stu's writing, Stu's composition and Tim's book are very charming and very witty. And yeah,
and Stuart Matthew Price, isn't it?
And Stuart Matthew Price, yeah. And sort of by hook or by crook, we stumbled on something that I think worked really, really well. That's us. Producing wise, I think they did a fantastic job at giving off an impression that this wasn't the finished article. You know, it wasn't staged. It was with scripts in front of you. But I suppose those of us who are used to being in the theatre, we're used to seeing those sorts of workshop productions or those, you know, rehearsed readings. And they're very often, for me, the most exciting things, when you feel like you're seeing between the gaps. Perhaps you're seeing the sort of stitching of the fabric. And I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Well, you both knew your score so well as well.
Yeah. I cheated on that one because I'd done it before. You know, that's a cheat for me. Rosie learnt that whole show in about, you know, a week. There were brand new songs, I think, for her as well. So I had a bit of a head start. So I can't claim any. I really can't claim anything on that one.
But so that's one project you were on. But you mentioned just a minute ago, I'm intrigued that you've been writing something.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned on Twitter, actually. Joe Stilgo, who is fantastic jazz pianist and vocalist, who's written shows for the stage in the past down at Chichester. Joe and I are writing a show together. I won't say much more than that. I'm not going to say what it's about. Hopefully it will see the light of day. It's fun, it's escapist, I suppose. It's an original story, an original script. I'm enjoying working with Joe very much. He's like his father, who you'll know is Richard Stilgo, the eminent lyricist. Joe has a way with words and a way with his brain that is rather wonderful and rather charming at the same time. And Joe and I worked together first, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, on a concert for BBC Radio 2, Friday Night is Music Night, which was celebrating the 80th anniversary of The Wizard of Oz. And we got on Like a House on Fire. Trevor Dion-Nicholas was in that concert too, as well, actually. We all got on Like a House on Fire, and I've worked with Trevor during lockdown as well. I did a gig for him, which was rather good fun. So I've worked with both of those two characters during lockdown, which is really rather fun. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully we're shaping up to a workshop of the first act at some point in the next couple of months, hopefully. But with all of these things, you know, it's always tempered with a certain amount of realism. You know, who's going to be putting new shows on at the moment? There are a great many writers, actors, anybody who has sat down in lockdown and written the great new musical or the great new play or the great new television series. So I'm not fooling myself that we're going to have a straightforward ride with it, but it's certainly meant that I've had something to concentrate on creatively, which I think we probably all needed, really.
Yes, yeah, and one thing that lockdown gives is time and space to actually sit down quietly. For some people, to sit down quietly and map something out, and actually not knowing how long we had, just sitting. It's lovely to keep your brain going with a project, isn't it? And going, right, I've got to get to there. I'm going to get there. Today is such and such a day. I'm going to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than just seeing it as a long, endless, what do I do next? Which it's done a similar thing for me, where it's given me structure to with lots of projects.
Yeah, sort of perversely almost. Yeah, you sort of you've established a sense of structure for yourself, just to sort of keep a handle on something. So that's been great. I've been recording as well. I did some gigs with my collaborator, a pianist, jazz pianist called Will Butterworth. We did some gigs at Crazy Cox at Brasserie Zadel, and we've been working for a while together off and on, and hadn't gone into the studio yet. So again, that was something that we thought, you know what, this is a perfect opportunity to get into a studio. So we've started recording an album. We'll have some more time over the next month or so to sort of finish that off and get into the studio and do that. So in a sense, I don't know what you're like, Lesley. I'm very good about sort of self-propelling things, and I've been quite fortunate over the last 6 or 7 years, I suppose, that acting wise and writing wise, I've not had many fallow periods, but certainly prior to that in my career, I did. And on top of teaching, I was always quite good about sort of setting up my own projects musically, you know, gigging or writing as well. So I suppose it took me a while to get self-motivated like that, probably until I was in my 30s. But once I did, I sort of, I recognized latterly, I suppose, that creating your own work is as important as picking up the phone and searching for others to ask you to work.
Yeah, do you know what I find exciting? It's from having left college in my mid-20s and auditioning for work and thinking what happens next, and feeling in between trying to get work and working, thinking, what do I do now? I'm creative. How can I be creative? And then that's when you get that spark, isn't it? Oh, I could do such and such.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you start writing. And I love that idea of creating something from nothing, because after all, that's where creativity comes from, isn't it? It doesn't have to necessarily go anywhere or become anything that everybody knows about. But if you've created something you're thoroughly satisfied with, it's such a good feeling.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. I think it's something that I laboured under, I think probably in the first part of my life, that idea that if you create something, it has to be a success. It has to hit this particular level or something like that. And moreover, I think it probably stymied me doing so, because I sort of felt like, especially with writing, I sort of felt like it wasn't my place to do so, because writers already existed. I didn't know how to be one necessarily.
Yeah.
And actually, I suppose maybe going to America helped as well, because there is a certain sense in America that being engaged with doing a great many different things is okay and laudable. And certainly, I think maybe for the first few years of my career, it's probably something that I projected onto the business over here, but I felt like there was a certain sense that you don't change lanes. You know, you stick to your lane, and you're not really supposed to try anything else. And I'm certain that the vast majority of that was projection from myself, but having sort of turned that on its head, giving myself the motivation to do something, and then allowing it, like you say, just to be something that exists for its own sake.
Yeah. I've read at some point somewhere, Sondheim, Stephen Sondheim, and Hal Prince, about their shows that they've done together over the years, and and they both talk about how do you measure success, because very often their shows haven't been an immediate financial success, and some of them have, you know, been losses. And that they've both said, how do you measure success? It's a show that we're both proud that we did. Sometimes with Sondheim, there's that saying, isn't there? A Sondheim show usually takes about 20 years for everybody to like it, because they're so ahead. For me, they're so ahead of their time, and they're so exciting. I remember the first time I saw Sweeney Todd, it scared the bejesus out of me, and now I just absolutely love it, and I love the different ways that it's done, and it still scares me, and it's so exciting, and it's that thing that they do it because they feel it's their next project, and that they complete it, the completion of it, and getting it performed is the success of it, and it's what you create. But so much these days is measured in money, isn't it? I mean, obviously it is.
Yeah, I suppose there's an understandable conflict between those two things. There always will be, I suppose.
Yeah.
What do I think? I was reading an interview with Rufus Norris the other day, who was saying, as artists, try and keep your overheads to a minimum, because the less that you need to be able to cover in your life, the more art that you're going to be able to create, and the more risks you're going to be able to create. So I think I've sort of deep down perhaps always felt that, but you can find examples where I suppose people have pursued a passion project and it's become a worldwide smash. So that's always the thing that we as creatives, I think, have in the back of our minds, isn't it? I wonder whether this one actually will be the big one. And I certainly think for producers, they always go, well, it's a bold producer that takes a risk on something new, but then when someone creates something that's kind of epoch changing, every producer wants something that follows suit and then sort of ignores other original ideas. So yeah, there'll be a conflict between art and commerce for the rest of time, I suppose, won't there?
Yeah, great art usually comes from no money though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I did a workshop during lockdown as well. I can't talk about it, unfortunately, but it's a show that sort of interrogates this quite a lot, and it's about an artist, a very famous artist from the 20th century, who I suppose came as close as possible to marrying those two things, and I felt really torn about it, to be honest. The idea that that money can mean as much as art. I don't know. I don't suppose I've really thought it all through in my head, but yeah, I think you're right. Most great art comes from, certainly the art that makes people usually comes from nothing, doesn't it?
Yes. Right, now my next question, I know you feel like you've probably done a full interview already, but it's a question that I was tempted this round of interviews not to include, but I still can't help wanting to know the answer. And it's about what people who work in the arts feel that the government can still do to help people who work in the industry, because there are so many people who work in theatre and in the arts generally who have been made absolutely stony broke in the last 10 months, and who are still waiting for their jobs to come back, and some people have had to find many people have had to find other ways of earning a living and trying to sort of keep going. And what are your views on that?
It's a big one, isn't it?
Without a big rant, probably. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose I try. Our time has been something of a pacifier with this, I suppose, Lesley, for me. I started off feeling quite enraged about the lack of help and the disdain that I think our present government feels about the arts. Then, I suppose, credit where credit is due, there was the announcement of the recovery package for arts and heritage and cultural organisations, which I suppose, if you look at it financially speaking, economically speaking, is comparable with some things across the world. However, I think there is still an awful long way to go with that. And I think the freelancers who make up the great majority of the people who work in the arts and in culture and in heritage organisations, or in the industry, I should say, rather than the organisations, I think those freelancers are the ones who will need help. And there is a great many of them who haven't had any help. So what do I think we should do? I suppose in a dream world, I think there might be a sort of situation like we see in Germany, where freelance creatives and artists are given something of a stipend to survive. And I suppose the government would argue that there are some freelancers and self-employed people who've been able to access that, but there are a great many, myself included, and my wife, who haven't been able to. So we're feeling that, I suppose, personally. I think the organisations that have had some of this recovery fund, and I'm sure they're planning on this, but it is sort of imbued, I think, in that money that they will receive to help the freelancers. And I think, you know, people like Nick Heitner have come out on the radio and said that is part of our remit when we open, is to help as many freelancers as possible. So I think, I suppose if I was to say what can we do, it's just to give people money, isn't it?
Yeah.
But every single industry and every single person who has been affected by this will be saying, you know, it's as simple as giving people money. So obviously more money is better, but it's not necessarily ever possible to give everybody money. That's a starter, I suppose. I think when the theatre comes back, like I say, I think those organisations who have been made safe will be doing already, but will feel the pressure from freelancers to support them and to help them. I think it's also wise probably to say that we can't go back. You know, there is a new reality. I'm not going to say a new normal, because that doesn't exist. I think there will be a new reality when we get back, and how that will look, I think needs a keener brain and mind to describe. But yeah, I think I weep for those people who are coming out of college, or have come out of college last year, or in college this year, who's you know, those years are so important. And I think, and I hope that there will be a reaction to that within the industry, in terms of giving those people the space to be platformed that they need.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really important as well.
That's a brilliant answer.
I'm not sure it was. I think it was probably a bit verbose.
It's a difficult subject, isn't it? And it's saying something you don't feel like is just off pat and from the heart, and that's what that sounds like. And very thoughtful answer. Thank you. Well, now look, we've covered all that. We've covered all of the things that we're going through now. Now for some lightheartedness. What is your favourite musical of all time, Mr. Fraser?
Yeah, it's a hard one, that. When you sent me, you kindly sent me these questions ahead of time, Leslie, and I was I was thinking about it, and if I could have three?
Go on.
Okay, that's great. One of them is certainly City of Angels.
Yeah.
Having done that a couple of times now professionally, but also one of the shows that I did when I was at university, in that sort of forming time that you have there, and hearing that score. I'm a huge jazz fan, and hearing that swing score sort of.
And you played Stone, didn't you?
I did play Stone.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the show that I know the best. The show that I think I've listened to the most probably is Sweeney Todd, and hope that one day I get to play that part. That's the sort of one part that I cover. I think it's Rosie did it at the ENO a few years ago with Bryn Terfel and Emma Thompson, and I sat there sort of marvelling at it and marvelling at the mastery of that score.
Yeah.
And the third one is Jesus Christ Superstar, which I did at college. Do you know, actually, the recording, the video recording of that production has somehow, I don't know how, made it onto YouTube.
Brilliant.
I must have been 18-year-old, I suppose, playing Judas in the student union hall at Birmingham University. It's one of those things that you just go, I hope that never sees the light of day. What it did do was sort of imbue this love of that particular show, which I think is also something of a masterwork. And my friend Tom Deering was the orchestrator and conductor on the recent production at the at Regent's Park, which I think was one of the most sort of enjoyable evenings at the theatre I've had in the last few years. So those three, I think would be my favourite: City of Angels, Sweeney Todd, and Jesus Christ Superstar.
What a lineup!
Yeah, I suppose they're quite not run of the mill. They're quite predictable, aren't they? I mean, I suppose I could have gone for something a bit more obscure, but the three of those, I think, would be the ones that, if you were to say pick three albums that you have to listen to that are musical theatre albums, which I don't listen to a great deal, actually, those would be the three.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. Next question. Favourite artist, musical theatre or musicals of all time, today and yesterday?
Yeah, do you know, I didn't actually really think about this one all that much. I suppose I have a great soft spot for some of those people who I heard on those cast recordings of those shows that we were just talking about. Someone like Len Cariou, I think, whose career spanned a great deal and was the original Sweeney Todd. I'd love to have seen him live. I can't imagine how thrilling that would have been. Equally, Carl Anderson, who was the Judas on Norman Jewison's film of Jesus Christ Superstar. I think seeing Carl Anderson live, and I think I'm right in saying he and Ted Neely, who played Jesus, were still touring and still singing that show, you know, into their 70s. I'm sure Ted Neely was. I can't remember if Carl had passed away before then, but yeah, people like that. I suppose I'd love to have rewound the clock and been able to go and see those guys live. I think that would have been absolutely thrilling. The kind of 19-year-old me would have adored that. And these days, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I probably have to say my wife.
I wondered if you'd say Rosie.
I bet she didn't say me. Rosie, I think, has hit such a sort of sweet spot in her career, and she's unlike very many people. She is just totally natural on stage, and I suppose I wasn't alone in marvelling at her working company. You know, I thought that was sort of era defining almost, and I can't see company going back now to. I can't see Bobby now being played by a man again. You know, and I think Rosie's work in that was of the highest standard.
It was wonderful, wasn't it? And when it was first mooted, because I talked to her about this, I thought, oh, I'm not sure. A woman playing Bobby, you know, like you normally think you've seen it done before, and you think, why has this all got to be changed about? Why can't we just have it as it was? And I sat there, and I just fell in love. And it's like, wow, oh God, this is better. That's how.
100%. You know, the show, I suppose, was always a favourite, wasn't it? And musically, yeah. I think it was always a favourite of people's. But I confess, I listened to the Broadway cast recording quite a bit at university, and I was a very big fan of it. But I suppose when I first saw it, I didn't feel quite as connected to it. I'm not quite sure why. I think maybe a guy of 35 who's trying to decide sort of where he is in his life and whether to settle down or not. Stakes aren't quite as high. It doesn't take a genius to work out, you know, that a 35-year-old woman has the stakes are sort of naturally that much higher. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that's the way that now becomes the norm. You know, things change, don't they? The only thing constant is change. I wonder what'll happen next. I wonder what will be, you know, what someone will think of next that will go, oh, it should have been done like that to begin with. You know, what's the next show that's going to have that happen to it?
I suppose it's keeping an open mind, isn't it? Because I'm such a fan of everything being done in the traditional way. You know, the old landmark musicals. You know, you've got to do it the way they wrote it because that's the way they wanted it. And then when you see something like Company, I know that's not from the golden age, but it made my my head light up. I just thought, oh, this is fantastic. This is when it works. Because I think it doesn't always work to change everything about.
No, I suppose not. And the one thing I would say is there's no harm trying, I suppose. You know, I think that's the
Yeah,
one thing that we have to remember as artists and creative, that we should try different things. You know, it's perhaps up to the critics to tie themselves in knots whether something works or not. For us, I think that instinct to challenge and that instinct to change is something that we should cleave to very strongly. You know, what might be next, what's a different way of looking at it, what's a different angle. And I suppose allied to that really is that sense of creating new work and not just regurgitating things that have gone before. I think that's the thing that Rosie and I have always found the most exciting is doing new work, and very frequently that comes from that instinct to see what is new. And so I suppose, yeah, reinterpreting something is always fraught with danger, isn't it? Because people have a connection to something. But I think the instinct to reinterpret something is so important.
yeah, I think I agree with that. Yes, gradually broadening my mind. Right, next one, Broadway or West End?
Yeah, I suppose I'd take both, really, as if that's all right.
Yes, what a brilliant answer. No one said that so far.
Have they not? Okay. Yeah, I've not worked on Broadway all that much, a couple of times, and I felt very welcomed and very fortunate to be there.
What was that experience like? What was it like when you realised you were going to go? Okay, because did it open in Chicago? This is the Pirate Queen, isn't it?
Yeah, the first show I did in New York was the Pirate Queen. Yeah. Well, I suppose I must have been 25 or something like that when I found out I got it. So I was a 25-year-old from Bracknell.
Wow.
Yeah, there was something about that that was really thrilling. I remember getting the phone call. Actually, I was at home with my mum and dad and sort of ran downstairs and went, "Mum, I've got the gig on Broadway." And my mum and dad, who are not theatre people but who are incredible. My dad's passed away, but you know, they were very very supportive people. Didn't really know, I don't think, what I was talking about, but nevertheless could feel my excitement. So I remember that moment. I suppose I felt pure excitement back then. I think I'd be a bit more nervous about it now. I think it's the sort of impetuosity of youth. I couldn't wait to get over there and start trying. And yeah, we started in Chicago and sort of had a 3-month tryout there, and then went to New York a few months later. I think it's safe to say that show didn't necessarily hit the heights. So artistically speaking, I think I would probably try and change that. But certainly in terms of the experience, I would make exactly the same choices that I made back then.
And sorry to interrupt you, but how could you have not done it? Because it was by such an outstanding team, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you know, very frequently, I suppose in the theatre, when you're fortunate enough to be in a position to say, "Do you want to come and do a show like this?" The touchstones for making that decision are very often, who am I working with and what have they done? And you know, in that situation, it was, like you say, a no-brainer. You know, Claude Michel and Alain had pretty hefty back history. And
for anyone that doesn't know, that's Schoenberg and Boublil.
Yeah, they've a few hits to their names. And yeah. We were being directed by Frank Galati, who had not long before that directed Ragtime on Broadway, that had done incredibly well, and he had come out of the Steppenwolf Theatre Company in Chicago, which you know, has a fantastic pedigree. And I think he won, did he win an Oscar or something for, I think he adapted Grapes of Wrath. Anyway, so you know, there was a hell of a team, and the producers were the producers behind Riverdance. Yeah. So you know, we felt like we had a lot of clout there, really. They were fantastic producers, so involved and so beautiful with people. And for whatever reason, it's probably not to go into now. There are artistic reasons why that one fell down.
It might have been the timing as well, mightn't it?
I think that would be a bit too gracious on the show, if I'm honest, Lesley. I don't think it was timing. I think the show had fundamental flaws. you're possibly right to say that at the time Broadway was looking for something different. Spring Awakening was opening at the same time, and that felt like it was ushering in something of a new direction for Broadway at that time.
And wasn't it compared with Les Mis as well at that time?
Naturally, given that it was the same writing team,
Yeah.
It was the first time really that Claude Michel and Alain had to come up with the storyline for one of their shows themselves. Les Mis, obviously there is the plot in black and white in the book. Miss Saigon, that's Madame Butterfly. This was I think the time when they were stretched narratively the most, and I think, I'm going to keep a diplomatic silence as to why that. I don't feel perhaps that was necessarily, it didn't quite hit the mark that it should have done.
But it's still an incredible opportunity, and you have played Broadway, and more than once, it's twice you've been on Broadway.
Yes, the play that we mentioned right at the top, The Machine, we did on Broadway in 2013. So, it was a very welcoming place to go, and I stayed in the States for a couple of years after The Pirate Queen, and loved my time there, and I would go back to New York in a heartbeat. I think we have a little girl now, so those things become slightly more difficult. When you're younger and have fewer roots, I suppose you're able to up sticks and follow pathways like that, but the West End, I suppose, on the flip side of things, has always been very welcoming to me as well, and I suppose I consider it something of a home for work. So
have you got a favourite theatre in the West End?
Have I a favourite theatre? Well, I've played the Garrick a number of times, and so that one feels like home. And I don't know if you've ever been backstage at the Garrick, but it has this lovely little courtyard outside the stage door that sort of becomes the hub of the sort of the unofficial green room, especially in the summer. That's where Young Frankenstein, we all sort of collected there, and I did Cambrana's season there as well, and something else I can't even think. But so we were going back in with City of Angels there. So that and the Donmar, I would say, are the two that I know the most, and they're probably would be my favourites.
Like that, wonderful. Thank you very much. Finally, to our final question: if you were to write a book about your life up to now, what would the title be, and what would your favourite chapter be?
Yeah, this was something of a googly, I think, Lesley. I don't know if people do people find this one easy to answer?
No.
That's all right then. I'm glad I'm not at the back of the class. It's funny, isn't it? Because you sort of think, a title for a book, I think, is an incredibly difficult thing. I suppose that's why we dodged around the issue with committee. We couldn't really think of something smaller that would encapsulate it. If pushed, probably, and I'd change this the next day. My dad used to say to me and my brother, it doesn't sound like this, but he used to say it when we'd done particularly well. He used to say, just think what you could have done if you'd really tried. So I would be inclined, I think, to use that as a working title.
I like that.
Being a fan of Eric Morecambe, it's kind of in that direction of application, And my favourite chapter, I think, I don't want this to sound too self-effacing, but it would probably be the foreword that I'd ask somebody else to write.
I can't have that. That's not.
I think. Well, okay, that would be one of my favourite chapters. I think I'd ask someone like, I don't know, someone who I've collaborated with who's particularly fun, like Ross Noble or Matt Lucas or Mark Gatiss or someone to write a foreword, and I think that would be the one that the chapter I gravitate towards.
I suppose this is the favourite period of your life up to now. That's what that chapter thing is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I don't know. It's a very difficult one. I'm not someone who dwells in the past all that much. if I'm honest, and neither do I dwell in the future too much. I don't dwell, if I'm honest. So without meaning to, I suppose I'm quite present. So I don't know. I'd say probably the current chapter. I suppose the one that is unfolding as we speak. Yeah. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, Lesley, but I can't honestly say there's one part of my life or one year of my life, or indeed, in terms of sort of the shows that I've done, one that's a favourite, because I've gotten something out of everything.
That's a very positive, optimistic chapter, because it's now, isn't it, that you're thinking about it? It's right. My favourite chapter would be now, which says an awful lot for your now, which I think is a fine place to be in that respect. That sounds good to me.
Good. I'm glad you've taken that as an answer. Thanks for that.
Yes, I'll let you have that.
Thank you so much.
Hadley, we've come to the end of our questions, and a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Lesley. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute honour to have you on Just Talking Musicals Meetup today, and thank you for all your time. Thank you for joining me, and I wish you all the very best in your projects and for everything in this coming year, and let's hope we can all get back to theatre very soon.
Let's hope so. Thanks, Lesley.
Thank you so much, Hadley. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Just talking musicals with you.